Okay, folks. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Thaddeus, for helping to herd the cats here. My name is Patrice Sims. I am a faculty member at Howard University School of Law. Among other things, I manage the environmental and energy law programming at the law school there. So we have the great pleasure of a couple of experts here to help us discuss issues related to pipeline infrastructure, modernization issues, and the implications associated and important issues associated with natural gas pipelines. We all in the district use natural gas in one way or another. We all rely on it as an energy source. But we don't perhaps often think about where that natural gas comes from, right? How that natural gas gets from those production sources, which may be hundreds or 1,000 miles away from us, into our homes. And it's interesting, if you think about this, it really is an issue of physical connection. Each and every one of our homes is literally physically connected to a production well somewhere in the United States. That is, if you could miniaturize yourself and run through those pipelines, you could run all the way to that production well, right? And this, if you think about what that means, that we have this network of pipelines that runs from the production side all the way down through distribution and into our homes, it's fairly mind-boggling, right, in terms of the scope of that network of pipeline infrastructure and all of the technical aspects that go along with maintaining it over long periods of time, maintaining it in light of other activities that are going on in and around and near the locations of those pipelines. And those are the kind of issues that I want to talk about today. I want to, before we get started in the conversation with our panelists, do a little bit of walking us back through that pipeline system, right? So our pipelines begin, well, talk about natural gas for a second, right? Natural gas, colorless, odorless, combustible, right? Fairly clean source of energy compared to some of the other fossil fuel energy sources. And we extract natural gas from a variety of different production sources, some of them on land, some of them offshore. Some of those on-land production facilities are just what we'd consider sort of traditional natural gas wells, and some of them are what we'd call non-traditional technologies that are becoming more prevalent recently, things like hydraulic fracturing, right? And probably most of you have heard about that in one way or another. We produce an extraordinary amount of natural gas in the United States, something on the order of 2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas every month, right? A lot of natural gas production. And that natural gas production happens at some 500,000 different producing wells across the United States, many of them sort of located in concentrated areas in places like Texas and Wyoming and Oklahoma. But that natural gas then has to make its way to us. And how does that happen? Well, first thing that happens, where a lot of that transportation happens, is in these natural gas transmission lines, right? It's fairly large diameter transmission lines that are bringing large quantities of natural gas from production areas out to distributors, right? Distributors like Washington Gas that will then take those large quantities of gases and get it out to the individual end users, whether it's homes or businesses or industry. So in order to accomplish that, we have a network of somewhere in the order of 300,000 miles of federally regulated transmission lines, right? Those are those big lines that are taking the gas from the wells to the distributors, right? Large diameter, as I say, Some of them are above ground, some of them are below ground, transporting this large quantity of produced natural gas from our natural gas wells. Those transmission pipelines end, if you will, at the door of the distributors. The distributors then take that natural gas and they have their own distribution system. And that distribution system, that's that local network of pipelines that take the gas. The distributor, like Washington Gas, takes that gas and gets it out to everybody, gets it out to the end users, right? And so here we're talking about a whole other network. You can sort of think about it as a tree, right? You have the big branches, and then at the end of the tree, you've got all the little branches that go out to each of the individual leaves of the tree. So the distribution pipelines head to the retail customers. They include larger distribution pipelines that we refer to generally as the gas mains, right? And then the individual lines that go from the gas mains to a business or a home, those service lines, those are the ones that you are supposed to look out for whenever you do any digging in your yard, right? Those service lines. If you think about how many service lines you have to provide all of the service to deliver natural gas across the United States, there are literally millions of miles. I would say 2 million or so, a little more than 2 million miles of these distribution lines across the United States, right? If you look at a particular jurisdiction, you look at local distribution, right? Different than national transmission, not regulated the same way by the federal government, regulated at the local level, right? And for example, regulated here primarily by the Public Service Commission. If you look at DC in particular, we have somewhere on the order of 1,200 miles of these gas mains running throughout the city. And then, of course, all of the individual service lines that run from those gas mains into the individual homes. So when you think of the extent and complexity of this interconnected network of gas pipelines that bring that gas, connect your home, to that gas production well somewhere in the middle of the country, perhaps. You can think of the challenges that go along with maintaining and operating a pipeline system like that in a way that's both effective, efficient, reliable, safe, right, and that appropriately considers potential for environmental consequences. It was funny. I was looking at the news yesterday, in fact, and saw that there was a pipeline explosion in California, injured on the order of 15 people, right, in Fresno. That was the result of some construction workers doing work, not aware of the presence of a transmission line, hit the transmission line, resulted in an explosion, and injured a bunch of people. Those are the sorts of things that are of great concern to us, obviously, as customers and as people who live in a landscape, whether we know it or not, that is underlaid to a large degree with pipelines carrying this combustible gas. And also, obviously, of great concern to the companies that own and operate these pipelines. The last thing they want to see happen is accidents like this. In addition, there are concerns associated with the release of natural gas into the atmosphere, right? It is composed primarily of methane being a fairly potent greenhouse gas, among other things. And that's something that we should care very much about when we think about the tremendous quantity of natural gas that we're pulling out of the ground and sending across the United States for our energy use. So our guests today will be able to share with us some more details about the issues associated with that network of natural gas pipelines, issues that we should be thinking about as we are approaching the challenge of modernizing our natural gas pipelines. Obviously, this infrastructure, like every other, deteriorates over time, and we have to maintain it, and there are consequences if we don't. So what I would like to do, without further ado, is start the conversation with our guests and talk a little bit about issues associated with natural gas pipelines, infrastructure, and modernization. And where I would like to start, our two guests come from different perspectives, and I would like to. I think what I'd like to do is have the two of you quickly introduce yourselves to our guests, and then briefly give us a sense of what, as a general proposition, what is the viewpoint that you bring to the consideration of pipeline infrastructure issues. What is it that you think is important, the host of important concerns that residents of the District of Columbia ought to be aware of and thinking of as they're considering the implications of pipeline infrastructure and infrastructure modernization? And I think we'll start over here with Mel.
Sure. Thank you, Patrice. Hi, everyone. My name's Huey. I'm with Washington Gas. I'm the Director of Pipeline Integrity and Compliance. The major role I have is to evaluate the risks in our systems, come up with other team members to come up with some mitigating strategies to take care of that risk. And also on the compliance side, we are governed by a set of rules and regulations. And in those regulations, there's 4 basic areas that we can focus on. Design, how you design the infrastructure, how you construct the infrastructure, how you operate the infrastructure, and then how you maintain the infrastructure. So that's pretty much our pillars on making sure that, first of all, we need to know how much and what size to put in the line, but then make sure that we design, construct, operate, and maintain it the best way. As far as the challenges, I think anyone who's driven in any metropolitan area, anytime there's a barricade or something, traffic backs up a lot, and we all know that and can appreciate it, I hope. What happens though when you are able to, if you ever have a chance, which hopefully you probably won't have one, but if you were to gaze into that hole, it's not just, in our case, our pipelines that we may need to maintain or renew. There are so many other utilities and other infrastructures underground. And that's why it's so important to make certain that before anyone starts digging, they know what other utilities are in the area. And it's very challenging. And because of the traffic, absolutely, there's a time frame. I don't think there's any perfect time to do the work. I think everyone can agree with that. But we are restricted from about 9 o'clock in the morning to about 3 in the afternoon to perform all of this work. And in that confined time space, there are a lot of activities that must take place. And for Washington Gas, and I would hope any utility, safety is our #1 priority. We want to make sure the public and the consumers and our employees and contractors are safe in doing what they do. So there's a lot of effort involved in traffic control and making sure that we plan these jobs like we should. We do our best to make sure that it's something, and that's probably when you're in the heart of the district itself. But if you're in a neighborhood, you can still be affected by what kind of construction goes on. So the best thing that we could do is communicate. And we provide information to the customers on the streets before the work begins. We do our best to do that 100%. And at least give everyone the opportunity to see what it is that we're planning to do in your area. And for the District of Columbia, I don't know how much detail you want me to get into. I can stop and then get back into a little bit.
Let's come back and we'll get back into some of the detail.
Okay.
And maybe we'll hear from Ben.
Sure. Thanks, Professor. Thanks, everyone. I have to say I'm in a good mood today. The weather is beautiful, and I hope we'll all enjoy it later. For any DC hockey fans, you know that the Capitals had a very exciting win last night, and I grew up here and live here. So that's all good, and I appreciate you spending some time today to learn about this really interesting subject. So I'm Ben Ratner. I work for Environmental Defense Fund. We're one of the biggest, one of the oldest, now international nonprofit organizations. And so our mission is to protect the living systems on which all life depends. So that means that we're pretty busy. We don't just work 9 to 5, and I'm sure my colleague here can appreciate that and feels the same way with his important work. I think that safety is an excellent way to think about this issue. And as a DC resident, my wife and I live in Northwest. I absolutely agree, safety first. EDF is very invested in the pipeline infrastructure and modernization effort, and so we'll be the first to say safety first. At the same time, we ought to think about safety in a broad way, shouldn't we? Right? Because it's the safety that we all have in our families and our kids and our coworkers when we're walking down the streets and when we're driving around. Of course, that's paramount. What about the safety of our climate? Right? What about the safety of our climate and doing everything in our power to prevent and minimize floods, droughts, hurricanes, disruptive events, sea rise that often affect some of the most vulnerable people in this country and around the world? And what it turns out, because my organization's done quite a bit of work on this methane emissions issue, is that actually methane, the most important greenhouse gas that most people have never heard of, it's about 84 times more potent of a climate change forcer over a 20-year time period than carbon dioxide. Can you imagine that? 84 times. So I refer to methane, it's like a greenhouse gas on steroids. And when you do the math and you figure out how much methane are we putting up in the air and how much carbon dioxide are we putting up in the air, I was surprised myself to learn that of the climate change impacts that we're experiencing right now, about a quarter of that is because of methane. Because of methane. And so the Environmental Defense Fund's view, and I think this is now widely shared in the environmental community, is that we need to do not just everything we can, cost effectively, reasonably, to drive down carbon dioxide emissions, but we need to hit methane emissions too. And while the oil and gas industry is not the only source of methane emissions, it is the leading industrial source. And within that industry, and I think the professor did a great job of showing sort of that value chain from the wells, the transmission pipelines, the distribution. Distribution, frankly, is probably a relatively small part of that overall picture, but it's still a meaningful part, and we know that there are opportunities to drive down those emissions. So I think safety, again, is a great way to think about it, the safety of all of us and our well-being as we walk down the streets, but also the safety of the climate and what we're leaving to future generations.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the details about these issues. And first, let's start with the question of safety. Some of the safety trends, data on safety trends is tracked by federal agencies. Not all of it, I think. But we do see, if we look at transmission pipeline incidents, the federally tracked data on transmission pipeline incidents shows, say in 2014, about 125 significant incidents. And a similar number for gas line distribution incidents in 2014. Do we track that data here in DC? What is our safety track record in DC when it comes to pipeline distribution pipeline incidents, and what are some of the biggest risk factors when it comes to pipeline safety?
Sure. In the district, I'd say over the past 20 years, there have been, first of all, the federal government gets their information from all the distribution and transmission companies, so they collect all of that. So they should line up very well, and it is available on the DOT sites. I think for the district, it's in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 of the past 20 years of serious incidents, compared to maybe an average of 35 or so a year in the country. So it's very small footprint or percentage of the serious incidents on the distribution side for the District of Columbia. So a very good safety record, and the majority of the issues, just like the example you gave a while ago, was excavation damage, someone digging. That is a number one risk in the country for some of the natural gas pipelines. It's someone unintentionally damaging and causing some leak occurrence on pipeline.
Yeah. Is there a modernization plan for DC, and how does that address safety?
Sure. And a lot of this all this information is on the Washington Gas website, washgas.com. The District Public Service Commission has approved the first 5 years of a 40-year program to modernize what we call the higher leak rate pipe. Those categories, I'll give you those categories: bare and bare steel. This is steel pipe that was put in, say, right after the war, World War II, and technology's improved downstream of that. So the modern pipe that we install now for our distribution system is polyethylene plastic. It's yellow plastic is what you'll see us installing. And so the areas that we're focusing on are bare and unprotected steel pipe. We won't get into a dissertation on protected and unprotected, but it's something that we try to make sure that the steel pipe in the ground does not rust. And then a large component in the District of Columbia is cast iron. People have mixed feelings on cast iron. I will tell you that cast iron is a very stable component for a pipeline. It's very durable. The way it was manufactured was sound. The way it was installed was sound. Very meticulously hand dug and bedded well. The challenge was every joint, it was like a bell and spigot, the joints tend to leak. So over the course of many years, we address those leaks and take care of those. But there is an effort from the federal side to make certain that we remove as much or all of the cast iron in our infrastructure, not just Washington, D.C. area, but in the whole, especially the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, where there's a high concentration of cast iron and natural gas pipe, but all over the country. So for this 40-year plan in the district, we have, at the time that we presented that, 428 miles of cast iron main, and all of that is supposed to be in place in that period of time.
Both the steel.
Not all of the steel. Not all of the steel. Just the steel that has no. If it has no coating on it to protect it from corroding, the bare steel, we're replacing that, and we're replacing cast iron. But the steel that we have in the ground that has a nice a coating on it, and also what we call cathodic protection, we monitor the leak rates, and the highest leak rates that we have is on bare steel, so we're approaching that, attacking that, and on unprotected steel and cast iron. When you get down to the plastic, and that's not including any excavation damages, because there's really not a lot of infrastructure improvement as far as the material to mitigate anything on excavation damage, making sure that we have it marked well. You can mark it, find it, and then that it's installed deep enough.
What is it, PVC pipe?
It's polyethylene.
Okay,
Polyethylene.
Do they have joints too?
When we put in main, we generally heat fuse it, which the fusion actually becomes stronger than the pipe itself. So we heat the ends, melt it, and push the melting. Not the same issue.
The joint connections.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Oh.
Plastic. Let's just call it plastic pipe.
That's why I call it PVC.
But PVC is
No, I know that.
a little different, but that's
In my
right.
head, it's easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have another question in the audience. Yes, sir.
Sure.
This is fascinating. I have an old geology degree, and nostalgia is working inside this whole body. What we're talking about physical entities, and this is very much the basis of a whole lot of stuff surrounding that, including how the methane gets transmitted. What makes the gas found in Texas somewhere, Colorado, what drives it all the way to this
Into our
gas
house.
house in Overton, Maryland?
Yeah.
We've been in natural gas industry. Washington Gas has been around over 160 years. It hasn't changed. It's very mechanical. It's pressure differential.
Yep.
You have a higher pressure going to a lower pressure. And it's just the way the molecule is going to go. It'll follow the path of least resistance.
And
it's the differential pressure.
And if you think about the long transmission system, right, from the producers to the distributors, that pipeline system has compressor stations about every 70 miles, pressurizing those pipelines to make sure that they
and the mechanics at these
compressor stations, yeah.
compressor stations, the equipment there, is that kept up to snuff? What kind of effort is necessary to keep that part of this system?
It's that for Washington Gas, we want to make sure we have molecules coming to our gate stations where we take the gas from these. But for those compressor stations, I'm trying to draw an analogy. It's not quite like your heart, but the companies who operate those pipelines have to have those machines running tip-top because it is all about capacity. If you don't increase the pressure in the pipeline, you can't move the volume of gas.
That's what I'm getting at.
Okay?
And is that machinery being modernized as quickly and as appropriately as possible?
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah.
So
And
here's another answer. No,
Yeah.
no, it's not.
Great. It's a great trend.
No, it's not. So, Environmental Defense Fund, we've done these 16 studies across the oil and gas value chain. Each one has had a neutral, independent university expert as the lead. And almost all those studies have had corporate partners like Exxon and Shell and Kinder Morgan and downstream companies like National Grid. Compressors have been in scope for a couple of those studies. And what you find is most of them are airtight, but not all of them. And actually, compressors are one of the most significant methane emission sources into the atmosphere in the country.
I'm glad I asked you.
There are certain best practices, right, that some companies are very proactive about doing, and it's to their credit. Regular maintenance, things that get very technical, and I won't go into all the detail in part because I don't understand all of it, but there are certain technical best practices that can reduce emissions. One of them, frankly, is leak detection and repair, which is exactly what it sounds like. You send a trained inspector out, in some cases with an infrared camera that lets you visualize a leak. There are other technologies as well. And if you find a leak, you fix it. Usually you can fix it instantaneously. Sometimes you can't. You put in a work order and you come back out and fix it later. But what you find is that the compressors, like most of the oil and gas infrastructure, the methane emissions from it is either totally unregulated or, from our perspective, underregulated. And so one of the significant developments, and this is good, I think, for a DC crowd, is that in January, so just 3 months ago, the Obama administration made a new, we think, groundbreaking announcement on methane emissions. And what the administration did is, for the first time now as a country, we now have a national goal of reducing emissions about 40 to 45% by 2025. What the administration teed up to help get us there is action from a number of different federal agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interior, several other agencies that we hope will take the best practices that the more proactive companies are doing, to their credit, and really make those best practices standard practices so that we don't have some bad apples or some weak actors who are letting these emissions in the air, not doing their best practices, and undermining this potential that natural gas has to be truly a meaningful contributor in the transition to a low-carbon economy, right? Because what folks in industry are fond of saying, and they're right, is that natural gas burns a lot cleaner than coal. Absolutely right. From a CO2 perspective, it burns about 50% cleaner than coal. But I just want every one of you to understand that every molecule of methane, whether it's from distribution or from a well or from a compressor, every molecule of methane that isn't burned, it's released unburned into the atmosphere, whether it's an unintentional leak or it's a result of a process that allows it, that undermines, to some extent, the advantage that natural gas has from a climate perspective relative to coal or relative to some other fuels. So it's just so important that we get it right.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to go into the timeline of the modernization. So you're talking about a 40-year time span, and I understand that a lot goes into fixing individual leaks, figuring out the traffic But even if, I mean, 40 years is ages, 5 years is way too long for the immediate lease. I think it was January 2014 that Duke University published a study of leaks in the DC area, and OPC had written Washington Gas with that concern, saying, what are you going to do to address the highest volume leaks? And I would love an update on that. It's been a year and a half almost. Have you done anything to address the worst leaks that came out in that study since January 2014?
Yes.
Okay.
Out of what the Duke team found, I'm not going to get the number exactly right, but was around 20 leaks that were found, and we went and researched ourselves, and a majority of those we concurred, and we have those taken care of.
I mean, I think there were over 100.
And that's
the highest volume. They're all taken care of now?
The ones that had a safety concern have been taken care of.
When will you be publishing sort of an update on either the Washington Gas? So the prioritization of repairs was redacted, I think, in the original application to have the modernization plan approved in 2012, maybe. So we couldn't tell what you were addressing first as the public. We get those documents posted every once in a while, but not very regularly. And when you talk about communication of all of these issues, I would love more regular updates from what's being done to address those issues.
And then we tried to keep the website as a nice focal point for that type of information. And like I said a while ago, there are several families of pipe material, and we want to focus on the ones that have higher leak rates to take care of those first. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's the bare steel main services that we have. And we also work on, we're working on EP. We're trying to touch all the programs, but we are focusing on the ones that have the higher leak rates at the beginning of the program. That's what we're doing.
Thanks. Can I interrupt just for a second? I've been informed that for purposes of our recording, if you would hit the button on your microphone and identify yourself, we'll have a better record of our discussions.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Hit the button on the mic. Okay, the
Should
light
should turn green, yeah.
turns green, but then I got to hold it. Is that?
No, it should stay green. Can you give us a hand?
Yeah, I'll try to hold it.
Okay.
My name is Taladin Ukhtar. I'm a ANC Commissioner for 4C01. One of the things that's going to be taking place, I believe it's going to start this month, is PEPCO's underground wiring system. What sort of coordinated efforts, if any, have you all's two companies made in order to, kind of reduce the impact of everybody digging up the street, at the same time? And I'm assuming electrical lines or gas lines are not going to be placed anywhere near electrical lines.
They are separated.
Okay.
When we put our plan forward in 2012 initially, we were trying our best to attack the leakiest pipe and touch all the different families. With PEPCO's plug plan, they have different priorities. Our areas that where we want to focus may be different. Both entities are using a software to input where their projects are going to take place, and there is an effort to coordinate. I would never say that there's not going to be an opportunity for them to skew somewhat, but I know that there are two particular PEPCO projects that are coming up first, and we are working with them to make certain we can coordinate with them. The challenge is, for any infrastructure replacement, it's not like this, and we can get it designed and get the materials ready, get the permits ready. So we need as much upfront opportunity to coordinate with them as possible. So I think as that project matures, the Petco project matures, I think the utilities will get much better at this. But it's going to be an ongoing challenge to make certain that we minimize the traffic as much as we can.
You had a
I'm Thaddeus Johnson with the Office of the People's Counsel. With utilities like Washington Gas, is there a mechanism to share best practices with other utilities when things go well or when things don't go well? Do you study other practices of other utility companies, and if so, how?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, on my team, we have someone who works with the American Gas Association, with LDCs all across the country, looking at almost every aspect. There's different subjects every year. I'm probably in excess of 50 companies, probably more than that, provide data, and they are compared directly. And what happens is the people who have the better statistics have the opportunity to present and say, hey, we would like to share this with everyone else. And then we have roundtables. Most of the time that's towards the summer. And all the utility operators, at least for the natural gas side, work and listen and hopefully bring something back that is a best practice from other LDCs. And last year, Washington Gas had a best practice on our damage prevention program. We're one of the leaders in the industry, and most people look at our statistics and really want to know how we get there. And it is one of those things. Again, it's a terrible analogy, but it's like a battleship. It takes a long time to steer a utility or any other entity sometimes to get to a best practice. But the most positive thing is being able to sustain that once you get there. And we've done a pretty good job on at least the excavation side to do that. But the short answer is yes.
Okay, we got a bunch of hands on. To make sure we get everyone. Gentlemen in the back, and then we'll come back up front to you, and then we'll come to you. Okay?
Matthew Fruman, former ANC commissioner, and I served on the Powerline Undergrounding Commission. So I'm curious, on the Powerline Undergrounding Commission, we thought a lot about cost, and we thought a lot about what the impact would be on rates, and we actually thought a fair amount about what the impact would be on jobs. And so I'm curious for this, what's the price tag to do that? I'm not saying that the work is not absolutely got to be done, but what's the price tag for the work? What's the thinking about how it will be paid for? And what, if anything, is being done to make sure that as much of the work as possible is done by D.C. residents?
Okay. We're for the first 5 years, we're aiming to spend $20 to $25 million a year. What that will impact it will have on the D.C. resident this first year is, I think, 60 cents per month on their bill, and that is it's going to be a surcharge or a separate item on their bill that they can see. This is all information you can find on our website, and probably be much more eloquent than I. And as far as the jobs, we do a majority, if not all, of our work through contractors, and we are not the only utility who are revitalizing the infrastructure in the country, especially on the East Coast. And it is challenging finding contractor complements to come take care of this. So whenever a contractor comes into town, they have to have, you can't work on a natural gas facility unless you're qualified. And it's a rigorous process for that to occur. So I would say anyone in the district that is interested in getting in pipeline repair, pipeline construction, there are plenty of opportunities. Like I said, there are many contractors that are in the area that are looking for good people.
Okay. Thaddeus is giving me a signal. How do we need to leave at 12? Do we need to break at 12? Okay, so we'll take another question. Are folks available a couple of minutes after the panel in case there are people who want to talk when we have a break? Okay, and one more thing up here.
I'm Gene Solon, a Southwest D.C. community activist. Great series of questions, leading me to ask the question that's been burning for a little while.
This is for you.
Uh-oh, all right.
No. Economics, including rates, including institutions, including corporate structure. Isn't there now such a thing called Washington Gas Energy Services? And doesn't that institution, that entity, provide not only natural gas, but maybe electricity as well? Are you guys expanding so that you can be a participant in the distribution of not only gas but other energy products as well?
You have done your homework. Yes. I think the entity, WGL Holdings is the company. WGL Energy is the subsidiary that does work with providing natural gas to customers, electricity, solar power, wind power, carbon offsets, that type of thing. So any concern, question you may have, please log on to the website and maneuver to that area and get more information. So yes, we are getting involved in all those entities.
I would like to give Ben an opportunity to make a couple of comments before we break. And if you want to come up, and I'm sorry I didn't get to, but I'm being told we need to break at 12. You want to come up and talk to the panel afterwards?
Sure. So there are two studies that we've done on methane emissions from the local distribution infrastructure, so from these city pipelines. And I'll tell you about them, and I'll do it briefly. One of them actually just came out about 3 weeks ago. We did this with Washington State University. We were a co-sponsor. A number of companies were co-sponsors as well. We basically found actually that nationally, emissions from this segment have gone down from 1/3 to 2/3. It's really good. But the remaining emissions are still equivalent to the climate impact of about 19 power plants and 15 million passenger vehicles. So we've made some progress, but there's still a lot of emissions out there. And there's very significant regional variability, city to city. In other words, some cities are much farther along, some cities have much bigger opportunities. And the number one finding that we take from this is that we really want to accelerate efforts to modernize infrastructure and do repairs. A lot of the things that we've been talking about today. So I just want to echo the question or suggestion that one of our commenters made earlier, that 40 years sure sounds like a long time. I think DC, we're pretty good at putting our mind to something and getting it done. So maybe there's a conversation that we could continue about whether we can cut that 40 years, 2 generations, into a decade or maybe even less than that. The second thing I want to mention, and I'll be quiet and be done, is we did a really neat study. And if you just look at one thing coming out of this from my talk, I want you to look at this, where we worked with Google and the Google Earth platform. We put very sophisticated methane quantification devices on Google cars, and we actually drove them around a number of American cities, plotting where those actual natural gas leaks are on city streets. So you can find it online. The maps are interactive. They're very, very visual. You see red dots, yellow dots. It's very interactive. And what you see is huge variety in how the cities are doing. Boston, you're going to see, like DC, a lot of these older, unprotected pipes, cast iron, steel. You see a lot of orange dots. You see a lot of red dots. Indianapolis, the newer sort of plastic pipes, you see very, very few dots. And so what that says to me is, again, let's try to look like a city that doesn't have a lot of dots. Let's try to accelerate some of the good efforts that it sounds like are already underway. So let me leave it there and encourage you to consult those resources.
Well, it sounds like this is a conversation that we could keep going for another half an hour easily. And I would encourage anyone who has burning questions to both come up and talk to us, but also it sounds like there's a tremendous amount of resources on the respective websites of Washington Gas and Environmental Defense Fund, so I encourage you to take a look at those. And let's give our panel a round of applause. And go eat.